Few places have seen more bloodshed than the Tower of London. For over 1,000 years, its cold stone walls have seen endless scenes of deprivation and death. For hundreds of rebels, traitors, and foreign agents, its dreary cells were the last things they ever saw. The Tower of London stands as one of the most infamous landmarks in British history. Its construction began in 1066 by William the Conqueror, and it was initially designed as a fortress to help solidify Norman rule over England. Over the centuries, its function evolved from royal residence to treasury, then armory, but it is best known for its role as a prison and execution site. High-profile traitors, political dissidents, and enemies of the crown often met their end within its walls. Though executions were more commonly held at Tower Hill, within sight of the tower, some of the most politically sensitive figures were put to death within the fortress itself. It became synonymous with power, control, and the violent consequences of defying the monarchy. Welcome to the infamous past, where we expose some of the most brutal and bloody aspects of our world throughout the ages. William Laud, Archbishop of Canterbury. William Laud, Archbishop of Canterbury, was a man of unwavering conviction. A staunch supporter of King Charles I, he championed religious conformism and sought to enforce the Anglican religion throughout the kingdom. But in doing so, he made enemies, powerful enemies. His policies provoked deep unrest, particularly among the Puritans, who believed him to be a Roman Catholic in disguise. As England spiraled into civil war, Laud's fate became entwined with that of his king, Charles I. Imprisoned in the Tower in 1640, he spent 4 years huddled within its cold, damp chambers. He prayed, he wrote, and waited. By the time his trial arrived, the outcome was already sealed. Parliament condemned him to death, and on the morning of January 10th, 1645, he was led to Tower Hill. The crowd gathered, murmuring in anticipation. Aloud one final solemn prayer, he placed his head upon the block. The axe fell, severing the head of one of the most powerful men in England. His blood soaked the scaffold, a grim prelude to the fate that would befall the king himself. As the head of the Church of England, Laud's death was an important milestone of the English Civil War. To his supporters, he was a martyr who had died for the king and the Church of England. To his puritanical enemies, he was an unwanted vestige of Catholicism and a servant of Rome. His execution sent a chilling message across England that no position, not even the highest religious office in the land, could protect one from the wrath of a divided nation. 4 years later, the king himself would lose his head, and Oliver Cromwell would eventually be made Lord Protector of the realm. James Scott, Duke of Monmouth. In 1660, 2 years after the death of Cromwell, Charles I's son would be welcomed home to England to rule as King Charles II. Charles was a womanizer with many illegitimate children, and one of those, James Scott, the Duke of Monmouth, believed himself to be destined for the throne. Despite being considered a bastard, he grew up amid courtly privilege and luxury. With the death of Charles II and the ascension of James II to the crown, the Duke of Monmouth saw an opportunity to take the throne for himself. He gathered an army and launched a rebellion in May 1685. His bid for power, however, was short-lived. Defeated at the Battle of Sedgemoor, he was captured, shackled, and brought to the Tower. He begged for mercy, pleading with his uncle, King James II, but the king remained unmoved. And so, on July 15, 1685, Monmouth climbed the scaffold at Tower Hill. His execution would become one of the most infamous in British history for its horrific nature. The executioner, Jack Ketch, was either incompetent or malicious, and was no stranger to a botched execution. The first blow landed poorly. The second did a little better. It took several agonizing strikes before Monmouth's head was finally severed, leaving the onlookers horrified. Monmouth's execution left a haunting legacy. It became a symbol of James II's ruthlessness, reinforcing his reputation as a king willing to spill noble blood to secure his rule. In the years that followed, whispers of Monmouth's name persisted, as did rumors that his ghost haunts the battlefield of Sedgemoor, forever reliving his greatest defeat. Simon Fraser, Lord Lovat. History would repeat itself less than 100 years later with the outbreak of the Jacobite Rising in 1745 and the eventual execution of Lord Lovat, Simon Fraser. Simon Fraser was an old man when he met his fate at the Tower. In 1747, a wily and untrustworthy figure, he had spent a lifetime navigating the treacherous waters of political intrigue. He had changed allegiances more than once, but in 1745, he threw his lot in with Charles Edward Stuart and the doomed Jacobite uprising, which sought to place a Catholic monarch of the Stuart dynasty on the throne of England. When the rebellion was defeated at Culloden, Lovat was captured and brought to the Tower. Unlike Monmouth, he did not beg for his life. He knew the game was over. Instead, he faced his death with an air of bemusement. But Lovat would not be the only victim of the day. On April 9, 1747, as he mounted the scaffold, a viewing platform collapsed, killing several spectators. Lovat, ever the cynic, found it amusing. Moments later, the axe fell, marking the last judicial beheading in British history. His death was not just the end of a man, but the end of an era. With Lovat's execution, the old Jacobite cause was finally extinguished, its dream of a Catholic Stuart restoration buried alongside him. Josef Jakobs. Josef Jakobs was not a nobleman or a rebel, but, like the Tower's other famous victims, he was guilty of treason. He was a spy, a German agent sent into Britain during World War II. His mission was simple: gather intelligence for the Nazis. But fate was not on his side. His cover was blown before he had even entered the country, thanks to Arthur Owens, a Welsh double agent whose vital intelligence led to Joseph's capture the day after his arrival. His trial was swift. A military tribunal found him guilty of espionage, and with that, his fate was sealed. Unlike the grand public executions of centuries past, Jakobs' death would be a quiet, methodical affair. On August 15, 1941, he was taken to a small rifle range inside the Tower, and he was given a medication to calm his nerves. 8 soldiers stood before him, rifles at the ready. A silent order was given, and the men fired. Jakobs was hit 5 times, with one piercing the heart. He was buried in an unmarked grave. Jakobs' execution marked the end of an era, being the last man to be executed at the Tower of London, the final chapter in its long and bloody history as a site of state-sanctioned death. The fortress that had claimed kings, traitors, and spies alike now stands silent, its stones bearing the echoes of centuries of suffering. The Tower of London remains a place of legend, its walls steeped in blood and sweat, bearing silent witness to 1,000 years of conspiracy, war, and rebellion. Some met their fate with dignity, others with terror, and some with laughter. Though the days of executions are long past, the Tower's legacy as a place of final judgment endures, drawing millions of visitors each year to walk the same stone paths where hundreds before them walked their last steps.